Invisible for years, until she fainted and a millionaire whispered, "I need you." Emily Hart was never the first name called in a meeting, nor was she the kind of employee who made heads turn when walking down the hallway. But that never mattered to her. To Emily, work wasn't about shining, it was about contributing, quietly yet indispensably. She worked at Helix Capital, a massive fintech corporation headquartered in the heart of Manhattan. Every day, hundreds of employees came and went, life moving at breakneck speed. But amidst the noise, Emily remained a still, steady presence. At 27, with delicate features and a slender frame, she often wore her hair in a neat bun, shirts buttoned to the collar, eyes locked on her screen. Few people remembered her name, yet without Emily, many things would fall apart. As a business operations analyst, her job wasn't glamorous, but it was foundational. She knew every process, every number, every loophole others overlooked. Each night, as the office lights dimmed one by one, Emily stayed behind, combing through spreadsheets, double-checking contract clauses, ensuring nothing was out of place. No one asked her to. She chose to. Because she still believed that somewhere dedication meant something. And yet, despite all the late nights and skipped lunches, she remained a shadow to everyone around her. People referred to her as the bun girl at the corner desk, or simply someone from ops. No one ever stopped to ask, "Are you okay?" or "Need a hand?" Emily never expected that. But sometimes late at night, alone on a high floor with nothing but the blue glow of her screen lighting her tired face, she wondered if anyone saw her at all. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have imagined, was that a pair of eyes had been watching her for a long time. The piercing gaze of the man everyone in the building feared. The one person Emily was certain didn't even know she existed. That night, the 43rd floor of Helix Capital was so quiet, one could hear the hum of the building's electricity. Every office light had been switched off, except one, tucked away in a far corner, where Emily Hart still sat, eyes heavy, locked onto a dimly lit screen. In front of her lay a complex contract document, thick with clauses and figures, all of which had to be finalized before tomorrow's strategy meeting. The wall clock ticked past 3 a.m. The bitter taste of cold coffee lingered on her lips. Long past effective. Her body begged for rest, but Emily pressed on. She combed through the lines with the precision of someone who knew a single mistake could cost the company millions. But her vision started to blur. The words bled into each other, losing all meaning. She rubbed her temples, her head spinning, unsure where the screen ended and the world began. When she tried to stand to stretch, her legs betrayed her. Everything went dark. Emily collapsed forward, her body slumping over the desk, scattering the pile of documents to the floor. For a brief moment, silence swallowed the room whole, but she wasn't alone. Upstairs, Nathaniel Reed, the CEO of Helix Capital, was still working. Unbeknownst to most, the powerful executive often returned to the office at night, preferring the silence to review financial projections. He believed silence revealed truths noise could never show. When he descended to the 43rd floor to retrieve a misplaced file, he didn't expect to see a desk lamp still on. He almost walked past, assuming someone had simply forgotten to turn it off. But then he saw her, the petite woman unconscious at her desk, surrounded by papers strewn across the floor. He froze, watching her in stunned silence. Her face was pale, her breath faint. Nathaniel stepped forward, gently brushing papers away from her cheek. His hand, accustomed only to signing deals and issuing orders, suddenly moved with an unfamiliar softness. In the pile of perfectly corrected reports, he saw more than data. He saw effort poured from the last drops of strength, devotion with no expectation of recognition. Without meaning to, a whisper escaped his lips, words he'd never planned, never even admitted to himself. "I need you." As soon as the words were out, he stepped back, as if startled by his own voice. His expression shifted, conflict flashing through his eyes. Nathaniel looked at her one last time, then bent down to gather the scattered documents, organizing them neatly. He adjusted her posture carefully, draped his suit jacket over her shoulders like a blanket. No one saw that moment. No one knew that in the stillness of that night, the coldest man in Helix Capital let something slip. Something far more human than power, emotion. And for Emily, even in unconsciousness, That moment had already started to change everything. The next morning, Emily awoke with the dazed feeling of someone emerging from a dream. Her neck ached, her head was heavy, and the unfamiliar suit jacket draped over her shoulders made her freeze. She remembered fainting, the blurry glow of the screen, her strength draining, but everything after that was a blank, except a voice. Low, deep, whisper soft. "I need you." Emily sat motionless at her desk, the jacket still resting on her shoulders. Had it really happened? Or had her exhausted mind conjured it in a haze? She folded the jacket neatly and placed it to the side. The documents that had spilled were now perfectly stacked. Her computer was still on. Everything looked untouched, as if nothing had happened. But something had. Inside her. Throughout the morning, Emily tried to function normally, but her heart skipped every time footsteps approached. She couldn't stop thinking about him, Nathaniel Reed, the man she'd always thought was untouchable, unreachable. She told herself he had just passed by, saw her unconscious, and acted out of professional duty. But then, during an early afternoon meeting, their eyes met, and his gaze didn't just glance past her like usual. It paused, held, just a moment longer than necessary, and she knew. He remembered. From that day on, things began to shift. Not openly, not obviously, but in small ways, so subtle they could have gone unnoticed. During a leadership meeting, Nathaniel suddenly turned and asked Emily's opinion on an operations strategy. Heads turned. Her voice trembled slightly as she answered, but she was clear, and he nodded like it was exactly what he expected. In team emails, she began to see her name CC'd more often. Certain sensitive reports, once only sent to senior managers, now came directly to her. The looks in the office changed. Some were curious. Others whispered behind her back as she passed. Who is she? Why is she suddenly on Reed's radar? Emily heard them, but she didn't react. She was trying to understand herself. It wasn't fear anymore. It wasn't curiosity. It was a quiet swell, rising from somewhere deep. Hope. Hope that she wasn't as invisible as she once believed. Nathaniel said nothing. He didn't mention that night, didn't repeat those words. But through every action, every glance across the elevator, across the conference table, across the silent rush of people, Emily knew he was watching. And what unsettled her the most was that she had started watching back. The air at Helix Capital that morning was heavy as lead. The quarterly strategy meeting was being held in the boardroom on the 45th floor, a vast glass room overlooking the Manhattan skyline. All senior executives were present. Emily, as usual, sat in the back row, laptop on her lap, ready to support where needed. The centerpiece of the meeting was a major foreign investment contract worth hundreds of millions. Emily had spent the last 3 nights combing through every clause and figure. She was sure, absolutely sure, it was perfect. But as the printed contract was placed on the table, something shifted. The CFO stood up, brows furrowed. Clause 14B. The transfer agreement has been altered, he said, voice taut. This could nullify the entire deal. Emily looked up, a chill running through her spine. She scanned the document. That clause, she had never approved it. A critical error. A trap. I don't understand, she started. Another executive interrupted coldly. This document was cleared by operations, wasn't it? And the last person to check it was you. Dozens of eyes turned toward her, sharp, accusing. Emily opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came. No one cared to hear her explanation. The villain had already been chosen. The air thickened. All that was left was one voice to confirm it. Nathaniel Reed's. The door opened. Nathaniel stepped in. Silence fell across the room. He walked to the head of the table, face unreadable, holding the very contract they were arguing over. Everyone froze. Explain, he said, calm, low, but commanding enough to still the room. One by one, the executives made their case, all pointing to Emily. She listened, heart aching, hands trembling. Her breath came in short gasps. She was seconds from collapse. And then, as she tried to speak, I swear I didn't. Nathaniel raised a hand, not to silence, but to still. He flipped through the pages, scanning every line. Then he looked up, directly at Emily. Ms. Hart is not at fault. The room shook with the weight of his words. One director tried to argue, but Nathaniel cut him off. I know how she works, her precision, her attention to detail. And this, he held up the contract, is sloppy. It's not hers. Thunderous silence. Instead of casting blame, find the real source. Check who had access after her final submission. He paused. I want a full report by 5 p.m. today. No one dared speak again. When the meeting ended, the room emptied quickly. Only Emily remained, frozen, eyes glistening. Nathaniel walked toward her. Daylight poured through the windows, casting sharp lines across his face. He looked at her, not as a CEO looks at an employee, but as a man who had seen her pain. He spoke quietly. I told you, I need you. And that means, I trust you. Emily turned her face, hiding her red eyes. Her heart cracked open. In that moment, there were no contracts, no boardroom, just two people. One who had always been invisible, and one who finally saw her more clearly than anyone else ever had. A week had passed since that fateful meeting. The internal investigation confirmed Emily was completely innocent. The contract edit had come from a senior director who had tampered with the clause for personal gain. He was immediately suspended. Emily was vindicated. But what moved her most wasn't just being cleared, it was that Nathaniel had trusted her from the beginning. Without evidence, without waiting for confirmation, he chose her side in front of everyone. Since then, Emily had started seeing him differently, not as a distant CEO, but as a man, wearing invisible scars behind crisp suits and unreadable eyes. Thursday evening, the office had emptied. But Emily stayed behind, reviewing end-of-quarter reports. She didn't want to go home yet, partly for work, partly because something felt unfinished, as if something was waiting, somewhere between the lines she hadn't printed yet. Then footsteps. Still here? The familiar low voice startled her. She turned. Nathaniel. No tie. Top buttons undone. He looked tired, but his eyes were calm, quiet. Just finishing a few reports, she replied, trying to sound casual. He nodded. Then unexpectedly, he gestured. Come with me. She hesitated, then stood and followed him. The elevator took them to the top floor, rarely accessed. When the doors opened, Emily froze. A private lounge. Sleek, quiet. Glass walls open to the entire city. The sunset had painted everything amber. The wind tapped gently against the glass like soft music. The space felt entirely different. Private, still, almost safe. Nathaniel walked to the window, hands in his pockets, eyes on the horizon. I don't usually bring people here, he said, not looking at her, but tonight felt different. Emily said nothing, but she felt it too, something unspoken shifting between them. Then his voice came, low, steady, as if speaking to the air. When people look at me, they see results, balance sheets, strategy, power. He exhaled. But they don't see the exhaustion, the nights I sit alone trying to hold everything together. Emily's heart clenched. This wasn't the man everyone feared, not the flawless CEO, but a human, shouldering too much, for too long. She didn't think, just said, I understand. Nathaniel turned, his gaze surprised, like he wasn't used to understanding without explanation. He walked toward her, steady steps, softer than usual. The fading light traced the lines of a man who had lived too many years in solitude. You're not like the others, Emily. His voice low, weighted with emotion. Everyone here wants something. They give to get. But you give without asking. And that terrifies me. Emily bit her lip, eyes shining. His words weren't flattery. They were a wound, slowly opening. I'm just doing what I believe is right, she answered softly but firmly. Nathaniel looked at her a moment longer, then gently picked up a folded blanket from the sofa and draped it over her shoulders. Sit, you look exhausted. Emily sat down, the fabric warm against her skin. Neither spoke. They just sat there, two people in a glass room above a restless city, silently realizing that somehow they weren't so far apart after all. That Friday, the rain came suddenly, like the sky was washing away a long, heavy week. By 7 p.m., the Helix Capital offices had mostly emptied. Staff hurried out, dodging the downpour. Emily remained, like always, tidying up a few lingering files, partly out of duty, partly because of a feeling she couldn't quite name. As she prepared to shut down her computer, footsteps approached behind her. "Still here," she turned. Nathaniel. No tie, top buttons undone, weariness in his face, but something softer in his gaze. "Just finishing some reports," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. He paused, then said firmly, "Let me take you home." She blinked. "That's not necessary. It's pouring. I don't want you walking alone." He didn't wait for more excuses. Minutes later, Emily was seated in the back of a sleek black car, Nathaniel beside her. The silence between them was thick. Streetlights blurred past the windows like memories not yet spoken. She looked out, avoiding his eyes. But his presence, so close, so real, was impossible to ignore. When the car stopped in front of her modest apartment building, she clutched her bag, ready to leave. But he spoke. "You have no idea how different you are." She turned. "Different how?" He inhaled deeply, like preparing to speak something he'd buried for years. "Everyone around me wants something. Money, influence, access. They approach me with intention, but you don't." He looked straight at her, voice quiet but unwavering. "You just do your work. You give without expecting. And that..." His voice softened. "I don't know what to do with that." Emily's heart pounded. Her chest tightened. No one had ever spoken to her that way. Certainly not him. He didn't pull away. He leaned closer, voice dropping lower. "You make me want to believe again." The confession landed in the small space like a soft blade, cutting, but almost gentle. Emily didn't answer right away. She was afraid if she spoke, something would shatter. But then softly she whispered, "I need you too." Everything froze. Nathaniel reached out, fingers brushing her cheek. Not possessive, not rushed, just a careful touch, as if to confirm she was real. Then he leaned in. Their first kiss wasn't rushed, it wasn't fiery. It was the release of all that had gone unsaid. A silent apology, a quiet thank you, an admission that two worlds, once thought never to collide, had finally found each other. In stillness. When they parted, still breathless, his forehead rested against hers. His voice, low and sincere, "You're not invisible to me, Emily, and from now on, you never will be." She smiled, a tear glistening in her eye. And for the first time in years, Emily believed she wasn't someone who passed through life unnoticed. She had been seen, she had been chosen, and she chose to stay. The Monday after that rainy weekend, there was something different in the air at Helix Capital. It wasn't a new deal or a quarterly report. It was the way Nathaniel Reed, the ever-private CEO, seemed to be scanning the room for someone in particular. Emily walked into the office as usual, coffee in hand. But for the first time as she passed the main lobby, the receptionist smiled and addressed her by name. "Good morning, Ms. Hart." She nodded politely, mildly surprised. It seemed small, but every detail pointed to the same truth. She was no longer the invisible one. That morning's meeting unfolded like usual, except for one moment. Emily was mid-sentence when a male colleague interrupted. It had happened countless times before, and each time she'd chosen silence. But this time Nathaniel's gaze lifted and locked onto hers. "Let Ms. Hart finish," he said, not just calmly, but with a quiet authority that made the room fall into reverent silence. The room went still. All eyes turned to her. Emily, heart pounding, kept her voice steady and continued her point as if nothing had happened. But deep inside, something had shifted. From that day forward, what once felt normal became quietly extraordinary. Nathaniel began using her name in meetings, not the ops analyst, but Emily Hart. He assigned her high-level tasks, and when questioned, he simply replied, "Because she understands this system better than anyone." There was no favoritism in his tone, just fact. But facts tend to travel fast and morph into rumors. Every hallway Emily walked down carried whispers. Some admiring, some suspicious, some bitter. Whispers of, "She's playing her cards right," or "Came out of nowhere, didn't she?" Emily heard them all, but she didn't respond. Instead, she worked harder, more precisely, because she knew what Nathaniel saw in her wasn't about any relationship. It was about every silent night she spent, perfecting numbers no one else noticed. One late evening, when only a few lights remained on, she was filing reports when Nathaniel appeared, leaning casually on the glass door frame of the meeting room. "Still here?" She looked up and smiled. "Just making sure everything's perfect." He nodded and stepped inside. "I like the way you work, quiet, no drama, but effective." Emily smiled, about to reply, when he stepped closer, voice lower. "There's something I haven't said." He paused, eyes locking onto hers. "I've never trusted anyone the way I trust you." Her heart stalled in her chest, breath caught in the pause that followed. Neither of them moved. He didn't need to touch her. That look was enough. Enough to say that amidst the deadlines, the meetings, the numbers, something was growing, quiet, relentless. Love doesn't always begin with a confession. Sometimes it begins with trust. And Nathaniel Reed, the man who once shut the world out, had chosen to place that trust in Emily Hart. Morning sunlight streamed through the crystal-clear windows of Helix Capital, casting gold across the hallways, the desks, the quiet dreams being slowly rebuilt. Emily walked through the main lobby, not with her head down, but tall, her shirt neatly pressed, her steps sure, and her eyes, once filled with doubt, now glowed with confidence. She was no longer that girl from ops. Now people called her by name, with respect. Directors nodded as she passed. New employees looked at her like a model of professionalism. One even asked, "Could you show me how you organize your calendar?" Emily just smiled, because she knew what made her different wasn't visibility. It was the fact that she finally chose to believe in herself. Upstairs, Nathaniel Reed stood in his office before the window, looking out over the still-waking city. He wore a light gray suit, coffee in hand, but his eyes no longer carried the same frost. He was waiting for her. When Emily walked in, he turned. No grand gestures, no sugary words, just a look, open, steady, real. "Ready for today?" he asked, that familiar warm tone. "Always," she replied, eyes as firm as the first day she ever sat in a boardroom. But this time, she wasn't the same woman. She was stronger, fuller, loved. That morning's meeting unfolded like every other strategic session. But between the data, charts, and projected growth, people began to notice something else. Something genuine. Not dreamy stares, not subtle touches, but rhythm. The way he waited for her to finish, the way she looked at him when he hesitated, the way they coexisted, like two parts finally in sync. They didn't need to announce anything. The way they looked at each other was enough. When the meeting ended, Emily packed up her laptop. Nathaniel approached, placing a hand gently on her back. A quiet gesture, but one that burned deep. On their way down, they walked side by side. A few employees stood as they passed, not out of hierarchy, but out of recognition. At the glass exit doors, bathed in sunlight, Nathaniel leaned close and whispered, "Remember what I said? That I needed you." Emily nodded, her eyes soft. "Now I know," he said. "I don't just need you. I can't imagine my life without you." She smiled, not because she was surprised, but because she had known it, since the moment he no longer saw her as invisible. They stepped out together, hands brushing, then holding, not by accident, by choice. Under a bright sky, amidst a rushing city, they were no longer the cold CEO and the invisible employee. They were two souls who had truly seen each other, beyond fear, beyond titles. Emily had learned she didn't need to exhaust herself to be seen. Her worth existed, even in silence. And Nathaniel had learned trust didn't weaken him. It made him stronger, because for once he wasn't carrying it all alone. This wasn't an ending. It was a new beginning, where trust and love no longer needed hiding, and two hearts, after years of silence, had finally found a voice, together. A proposal doesn't need to be extravagant. Sometimes it only needs to happen at the right moment, with the right person. The night before, Emily had stood in the kitchen, stirring a cup of tea long gone cold. Nathaniel was already asleep, his face softened by exhaustion. She had everything she'd once thought impossible: love, partnership, a home, but still a small fear lingered. What if it disappeared? What if she wasn't enough? Her voice broke the silence, a whisper to no one but herself. Will there ever be a day I stop wondering if I deserve this? For Emily, that moment came on a gentle autumn afternoon, when the city wore its golden leaves and the sky felt too still to be real. Nathaniel took her to the little riverside park, where they often escaped the world. They sat on their familiar wooden bench, shoulder to shoulder, silent. The breeze caught her hair, brushing her cheek. Just as she turned to speak, he was already kneeling before her. No diamonds, no grand music. Just Nathaniel, steady eyes, trembling hands, offering a simple ring. And then he spoke, voice low, reverent, almost trembling with sincerity. Emily, will you let me be the man who chooses you, every day for the rest of our lives? I used to think strength meant never needing anyone, but you showed me real strength is choosing someone again and again, even when it's terrifying. Emily froze. It felt as if time had paused, as if every unspoken word, every glance, every silent heartbeat had led her right to this moment. She smiled, nodded, and wrapped her arms around him. No fancy words, just two hearts that, after everything, had found their way to each other. 3 months later, they were married. A garden, soft lights, gentle music, familiar faces. Emily wore a simple white dress, elegant, not extravagant. Nathaniel wore a pale gray suit and smiled in that rare way that made more than a few eyes tear up. When they spoke their vows, everyone held their breath. Nathaniel didn't promise perfection. He promised honesty, listening, never letting go. Emily didn't promise fearlessness. She promised to share her fears, her truths, and to keep choosing him, even on the hard days. They kissed beneath string lights, bathed in sunset glow. Not a conclusion, but the beginning of a new chapter. Marriage wasn't always romantic, but it was real. On nights when Nathaniel came home late and quiet, Emily didn't press. She simply handed him warm tea, touched his shoulder, and sat beside him in silence. On days when Emily doubted herself, felt not enough, Nathaniel would look at her and say, "You are enough. You always have been." Helix Capital soared higher than ever, but Nathaniel no longer bore it alone. Emily was not just his wife. She was his partner, his mirror, his calm. What began as trust at work slowly blossomed into a life beyond office walls. 2 years later, Lily was born. She had Emily's eyes and Nathaniel's secret smile. The crib stood beside their bed. They took turns holding her through midnight cries. In those sleepy moments, Emily realized love wasn't made in big declarations. It lived in shared sleepless nights and quiet, fragile hands holding on. Then came Ethan. Laughter exploded through their home. Lily became a proud big sister. Nathaniel, once cold and unreadable, could now spend hours building blocks. Emily, once invisible in the background, now stood strong, guiding both home and heart. They no longer lived to chase deadlines. They lived to end each day together. One rainy Sunday, the house smelled of warm cookies. Lily colored at the table. Ethan crawled on the floor with a plastic car. Emily stirred batter beside Nathaniel, who watched the oven. Their eyes met. "We really made it this far, didn't we?" The door creaked open. Their children ran into their arms. Nathaniel lifted Ethan. Emily wrapped Lily close. All four sank into the couch, wrapped in soft light. Outside, the night fell, but inside, light remained. Because where love lived, where trust stayed, where people chose each other daily, that was home. She once sat slumped over her desk on the 43rd floor, long past midnight, unseen by anyone. Her only companion, the cold blue glow of her screen. Now, tiny arms wrapped around her neck, and her daughter whispered, "Mommy, come play." Emily smiled, heart swelling. She had once wondered if anyone would ever see her. Now she was the center of someone's whole world. Emily had once been invisible. Nathaniel had once locked every emotion away. But now they were a family. No need for noise. No need to prove. Just enough love to look back and say, we truly lived with all our hearts. And in this quiet corner of the world, that was more than enough. Marriage wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of new chapters, where every small milestone in their family became a memory worth holding on to. That morning, the sky was unusually clear. Soft sunlight spilled through the kitchen window, touching the breakfast table where Emily was setting warm slices of toast. Lily, dressed in her very first school uniform, shifted nervously in her chair, torn between excitement and fear. Ethan, 2 years younger, raced around the table with an old toy car, blissfully unaware of his sister's worries. Nathaniel sat beside Lily, fumbling with the tiny buttons of her collar, hands that once signed billion-dollar contracts now clumsy with something so delicate. Emily watched from across the table, her heart swelling with warmth. "Daddy, will they like me?" Lily whispered, eyes wide with worry. Nathaniel paused. His eyes, usually sharp and unreadable, softened. "They don't have to like you, Lily. What matters is that you like who you are. And I promise, Mommy, Ethan, and I will always like you." A smile spread across Lily's face as she clutched his hand. Ethan barged in, proudly raising his toy car. "Sissy, can I come school too?" Laughter filled the room. Emily scooped him into her lap, kissing his messy hair. "Not yet, champ, but one day you'll go to school too, and your sister will show you how it's done." At the school gate, Lily clung tightly to her mother's hand while Nathaniel carried Ethan on his hip. The crowd of parents and children blurred away. It felt as if, in that moment, only the four of them existed. Emily knelt down, her eyes level with Lily's. Her hands rested on the girl's small shoulders. "You'll be fine. Remember, just be kind. That's more important than anything." Lily nodded, took a deep breath, and let go. She walked toward the green-painted gates. For Emily, the moment tightened her chest. It was another lesson in letting go. Nathaniel quietly reached for his wife's hand. He didn't speak. He simply held it. Ethan waved wildly from his father's arms. "Bye-bye, sissy. Bring me candy." Their laughter rang out, washing away the last traces of worry. On the drive home, golden autumn light filtered through the trees. Emily leaned her head against Nathaniel's shoulder, whispering, "She's growing too fast." His voice rumbled low, thick with emotion. "Faster than I'm ready for. But you know what? She's braver than I'll ever be." Ethan dozed off in the back seat, toy car slipping from his hand. In the rearview mirror, Emily caught their reflection. A family, imperfect but whole. That evening, when Lily returned home, she ran into her parents' arms, bubbling with stories of new friends and a kind teacher. Ethan trailed behind, eager to share his own stories from home. As laughter filled the living room, Emily realized the first day of school wasn't just a milestone for Lily. It was a gentle reminder that this family, once built from fragile trust, had become the safest home for four beating hearts.